Trump just hit India with the most brutal tariffs he's ever imposed on any ally. 50% punishment rates that would cripple most nations overnight. But Modi's response was so brilliant, it made America's most aggressive president beg for negotiations within weeks. What did India do that turned the tables so completely? Because this isn't just about oil or tariffs. This is about how a master strategist just redefined global power. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how Modi played Trump like a chess grandmaster against a kindergartner. Let me paint you the picture that had Washington panicking. India-Russia trade exploded to $68.7 billion in 2025. Nearly 6 times higher than before the pandemic. That's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. That's a complete realignment of global economics happening right under America's nose. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. While everyone focused on the headlines about tariffs and trade wars, Modi was quietly executing the most brilliant geopolitical strategy of the 21st century. And Trump? He fell for it completely. Meet Rajesh Mehta, a textile exporter from Gujarat, who built his business over 20 years serving American retailers. His factory employed 200 people, their families depending on orders from Walmart, Target, and dozens of American brands. In July 2025, his world shattered. Trump doubled tariffs from 25% to 50% as direct punishment for India buying Russian oil. Overnight, Indian goods became almost impossible to sell in America. Rajesh watched his orders plummet 40% in weeks. His American partners, companies he'd worked with for decades, suddenly couldn't afford his products. But here's what CNN, Fox News, and every major outlet completely missed in their coverage. While they reported on the trade war drama, they ignored the chess match happening behind the scenes. India wasn't just buying oil. They were building something far more dangerous to American global dominance. A parallel economy that could function completely independent of Western control. About a third of India's oil imports come from Russia. But here's the genius part that changed everything. According to Petroleum Economics research from 2024, this strategy saves India $3.2 billion monthly on energy costs. That's not just savings. That's a competitive advantage that transforms entire industries. Priya Sharma runs a small textile factory in Mumbai with 50 employees. While her competitors across Asia struggled with energy inflation that was crushing manufacturing worldwide, she kept her machines running 24/7 on cheap Russian oil. Her production costs dropped 35%, while everyone else's skyrocketed. She didn't just survive, she thrived. By September 2024, she'd expanded her workforce by 60%, taking market share from struggling competitors in Vietnam, Bangladesh, and even China. But Modi wasn't playing small ball. The real masterstroke was building an entire alternative economic ecosystem, while Trump thought he was winning a trade war. This is where it gets absolutely insane. India reminded Trump of an inconvenient truth that made his entire strategy collapse. It was the US administration that originally asked India to purchase Russian oil back in 2022 to keep global markets calm after the Ukraine invasion. Trump was literally punishing India for solving America's energy crisis. But wait, it gets crazier. Energy market analysis reveals that refined Indian petroleum products were still flowing to America even during the tariff war. Trump's punishment was hitting the middlemen in his own supply chain. American gas stations were selling fuel refined in Indian facilities using Russian crude. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Trump was sanctioning his own energy security. Remember Rajesh, our textile exporter? Here's how he turned Trump's attack into the victory that shocked everyone. Yes, his US exports crashed 40%. But his energy costs plummeted 35% thanks to cheap Russian oil powering his factory. Instead of panicking, Rajesh pivoted hard. He expanded to domestic markets where demand was exploding thanks to India's growing middle class. He built partnerships across Southeast Asia, tapping into ASEAN markets hungry for affordable textiles. He even launched a direct-to-consumer brand selling online across India. By December 2024, Rajesh wasn't just surviving Trump's economic warfare, he was more profitable than ever. His revenue was up 25% compared to pre-tariff levels. He'd accidentally been freed from dependence on American buyers who squeezed his margins for decades. This wasn't just one success story. Across India, manufacturers were discovering the same thing. Trump's attack had forced them to diversify, innovate, and build resilience they never knew they needed. But Modi was playing an even deeper game. While Trump focused on tariffs, Modi was quietly constructing the economic alliance that would make America's threats irrelevant forever. Russian embassy officials confirmed that oil shipments to India would continue despite US pressure, adding that Moscow hoped for a trilateral India-Russia-China meeting soon. This wasn't just defiance. This was India publicly building the parallel economy that America's foreign policy establishment had nightmares about. Think about what that means. The world's largest democracy, the world's largest authoritarian state, and the world's largest country by landmass were coordinating to create an economic bloc that could bypass American financial systems entirely. If you thought tariffs would break India, you underestimated 5,000 years of strategic thinking. Modi wasn't just resisting American pressure, he was making America irrelevant to India's growth story. Meet Amit Patel, who runs a pharmaceutical company in Hyderabad that used to export 70% of production to American markets. His cholesterol medications, diabetes treatments, and generic drugs filled American pharmacy shelves for 15 years. When Trump's tariffs hit pharma exports, Amit didn't panic. He'd been watching Modi's strategy unfold and was ready. Within 6 months, he'd completely shifted his supply chain to Asian markets. Now 60% of his exports go to BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, plus emerging markets across Southeast Asia and Africa. The profit margins are higher than he ever got from American buyers who constantly pushed for lower prices. But here's the kicker. Amit's new customers pay in local currencies, not dollars. His business was becoming dollar independent, insulated from American monetary policy and sanctions. Goldman Sachs' 2025 report shows this wasn't just one company or one sector. India's trade diversification reduced US dependency by 23% in just 8 months. Modi didn't just resist Trump's economic warfare, he used it to accelerate India's strategic independence. Meanwhile, American companies that had relied on Indian suppliers for decades were scrambling. The tariffs made Indian goods unaffordable, but finding alternative suppliers in other countries took months or years of relationship building. US textile companies faced shortages. American pharmaceutical companies lost their most reliable generic drug suppliers. Even tech companies discovered their software development partners in India were pivoting to European and Asian clients. Trump thought he was punishing India. Instead, he was punishing American businesses and consumers while forcing India to build the economic independence they should have developed decades earlier. But what happened next shocked even seasoned diplomats who'd watched trade wars for decades. The reversal was so dramatic it made geopolitical analysts dizzy. Reports emerged that Trump had asked the European Union to impose 100% tariffs on India and China, essentially trying to get Europe to fight his economic war for him. European leaders privately laughed at the request. They weren't about to destroy their own trade relationships to help Trump's re-election campaign. If anything, they saw opportunity in America's self-destructive trade policy. But within days of this diplomatic embarrassment, everything changed. Trump and Modi struck a conciliatory tone, voicing optimism on US-India trade talks. The same president who'd called India's trade practices totally one-sided disaster was suddenly praising Modi as a very good friend. What happened? Wall Street Journal analysis reveals the uncomfortable truth that had Trump's advisors panicking. His tariffs had pushed India exactly where America didn't want them to go, closer to China and Russia. The punishment designed to bring India to heel had accidentally accelerated the creation of the anti-Western economic bloc that American strategists had spent decades trying to prevent. Remember Rajesh, our textile exporter. His business transformation was now complete. He sourced cotton from Brazil, dyes from Russia, synthetic materials from China, and machinery from Germany. His supply chain included 12 different BRICS and allied nations. His supply chain resilience was higher than ever, his costs were lower, and his profits were up 30%. Trump's attack had inadvertently made Indian businesses stronger, more independent, and more connected to the rest of the world. But the single move that truly broke Trump's resolve was still coming. And when you understand what it was, you'll see why this wasn't just about trade. It was about the future of global power itself. Here's the masterstroke that changed everything. India didn't just buy Russian oil. They built an entire parallel financial system that completely bypassed American control. While everyone focused on oil purchases, India was quietly constructing something far more threatening to US global dominance. Alternative payment systems, currency swap agreements, and trade mechanisms that could function without dollars, without American banks, and without American approval. Indian government sources confirmed they would keep purchasing Russian oil despite all of Trump's threats. But it wasn't just about oil anymore. It was about proving that America's economic weapons, sanctions, tariffs, financial exclusion, had lost their power against countries willing to build their own systems. The rupee-ruble trade mechanism allowed India and Russia to completely bypass the dollar-dominated SWIFT system. Chinese yuan became acceptable for certain transactions. Even cryptocurrency and gold were being explored for international payments. Modi had played the perfect game. Every aggressive move from Trump had been turned into strategic advantage for India. America thought they were wielding economic weapons. But India had just proven those weapons were useless against a country willing to build its own system. Pryor's textile factory in Mumbai had become the perfect example of this transformation. She was now part of a manufacturing ecosystem powered by cheap Russian energy, connected to markets from Moscow to Beijing to Sao Paulo. Her factory doesn't just serve local customers. It powers entire communities, creating exactly the kind of jobs that Trump's tariffs were supposed to destroy. Energy security analysis shows that India reduced oil price volatility by 67% through diversification. While American consumers faced gas price spikes every time geopolitical tensions rose, Indians enjoyed stable, predictable energy costs that fueled consistent economic growth. Indian stock markets hit record highs. Foreign investment from non-Western countries poured in. The rupee strengthened against the dollar for the first time in years. Trump's economic war had backfired so completely that America was now facing strategic encirclement by the very alliance his aggression had created. But here's where the story gets even more incredible. Trump's own business interests started suffering from his India policy. American agricultural exports to India collapsed as Modi retaliated with targeted tariffs on US soybeans, wheat, and corn. Farmers in Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska, key Trump supporters, watched their incomes crash as India bought agricultural products from Brazil, Argentina, and Russia instead. US technology companies lost billions in Indian market share as Modi's Digital India initiative pivoted toward Chinese and European partnerships. American pharmaceuticals faced generic competition from Indian companies that were now cost competitive globally thanks to cheap energy. The economic pain was spreading across Trump's political base. The same voters who cheered his tough stance on India were now feeling the consequences in their bank accounts. Meanwhile, Modi's approval ratings in India soared to historic highs. Indians saw their leader standing up to American bullying while delivering economic prosperity at home. The narrative of Indian independence and strength resonated across party lines. Trump found himself in an impossible position. His India policy was failing strategically, economically, and politically. Something had to change. The phone call that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in March 2025. Details remain classified, but diplomatic sources say Trump personally reached out to Modi to discuss resetting the relationship. Within 48 hours, both leaders were publicly expressing optimism about future cooperation. The tone shift was so dramatic that analysts are still trying to understand what was discussed in that conversation. But the damage to American global influence was already done. India had proven that economic warfare against major powers in the 21st century doesn't work the way it did in the 20th century. Countries watching the India-US standoff learned a crucial lesson. Diversification and alternative systems could neutralize American economic pressure. The era of unchallenged US economic dominance was ending. Brazil started expanding currency swap agreements with China. Turkey increased trade with Russia. Even European countries began discussing reduced dependence on dollar-denominated transactions. Modi's strategy hadn't just saved India from American economic pressure. It had accidentally triggered a global shift away from US-dominated economic systems. The ripple effects are still unfolding. American diplomatic influence is declining as countries realize they have alternatives to US partnerships. The dollar's role as the global reserve currency faces its first serious challenge in decades. Trump's attempt to pressure India had inadvertently accelerated the emergence of a multipolar world economic system. Exactly the outcome American grand strategy had spent 75 years trying to prevent. Today, Rajesh employs 300 people, up from 200 before the trade war. Pryor's factory has expanded to 3 locations across India. Amit's pharmaceutical company is planning manufacturing facilities in 5 countries. These aren't just business success stories. They're symbols of how Modi transformed Trump's economic attack into India's economic liberation. The lesson is clear. In the interconnected economy of the 21st century, economic warfare often hurts the attacker more than the target. Trump learned this the hard way when his pressure campaign against India backfired so spectacularly that he had to beg for negotiations. Modi didn't just win a trade war, he fundamentally changed the global economic order. And Trump's role in that transformation? He was the unwitting catalyst who proved American economic dominance could be challenged and defeated. So here's what I want to know. Was Modi's strategy pure calculated genius from day one? Or did he just get incredibly lucky that Trump's aggression backfired so spectacularly? Because if this was planned from the beginning, India just gave the world a masterclass in 21st century power politics. They took America's biggest economic weapon and turned it into India's declaration of independence. Drop your take in the comments. Calculated chess move or fortunate coincidence? Because either way, the geopolitical game just changed forever.